morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're listening in the world to this podcast today. My name's Paul Webb. I am the founder of B2B Energy, and you are listening to Energy Speaks Back. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, and welcome to episode 7. And I'm really excited about this episode because tonight's episode is a UK-based interview with a very close friend of mine, Mike Mann. Now, me and Mike have been working together on some projects, looking at KVA and availability on a building, but we've also done a lot of work on ESOS. Now, we're both working for the government regarding legislation and ESOS, so we've got lots to talk about that. But before we start any of the conversation, I'm going to introduce you to Mike and let him tell you about what he is all about. Mike, tell us about yourself. Oh, first of all, great to see you, Mike. Interesting to see that you're a different view because your camera's normally facing up, but it's really good to see you tonight.
Yeah. Hi, Paul. Yes, and hello, everybody. Well, I'm a consulting engineer in the UK. I've got quite a lot of global experience with building design, that type of thing. In the last 10 years, I've focused my efforts on energy and sustainability. I was an executive director of a global multidiscipline energy consultancy for over 20 years. And during that period, I set up and managed UK and international offices, and I was involved in major UK and international commercial, leisure and retail projects. My role then included leading multidiscipline design teams in the Middle East, South Africa, India, Ireland and other parts of Europe. And that was on schemes of anything, fairly large schemes, but anything from, say, 100 million up to about 2 billion value. Latterly,
nothing really small then, Mike. No small.
No, but they give you good project experience. I think that's really what I'm trying to illustrate here is that, I've done smaller projects, but I've also done some big ones, and you get some knowledge and experience from working on large schemes, which is fairly unique. During all that period, I've also spent about 10 years living and working overseas in the Middle East, Africa, and South America. So I've run offices in those areas and delivered projects. I've also set up offices for delivery of design services from India and the Philippines. So I've covered quite a range of project types. I've done everything from domestic work up to large commercial projects, which the large retail-led schemes that we did, you could describe them as rebuilding town centres, really, or creating town centres, because they've had everything from shops, offices, hotels, car parks, even ski slopes. So that gives you a broad exposure to a wide range of disciplines and skills that are needed to design, operate and maintain buildings.
So one thing that's sticking out with me there, Mike, obviously you've done a lot of work overseas and the variations of different technology projects you've actually worked on. But what has been the common ground? Has there been a common ground throughout what you've been doing?
I think the common theme that I have developed from that really is always trying to approach things from the client's perspective, understand what the client thinks he needs and what he actually needs, um, but also deliver it in a friendly and cost-effective way. When I talk about cost effectiveness, I mean both from the fees that I'm being paid to deliver the services that the client is looking for, but also the commercial side of it in procuring contractors and products and services to actually get the project delivered in a cost-effective way. Um, I've worked for a few of the UK's large retail clients and supermarkets, and in the supermarket arena particularly, you get a lot of exposure to very cost-driven, good quality solutions. So I think that's been my mantra, I suppose, is being proactive, cost effective, and providing the client with what they both want and need.
You mentioned retail there and supermarkets. My experience with supermarkets is all about cost, obviously. And when they tender to bring in baked beans, they're always trying to drill down and get that right profit margin. But I've
Yes.
also noticed, like working with the retail and supermarket areas, that they've had a really strong appetite for maintaining sustainability and reducing costs through their energy, and they really do have that within their mindset, I believe.
Yes, I think what's interesting about retailers is that they have to move with the times. Whether you're selling food or you're selling fashion, it's a relatively fast-moving market, and they're accustomed to making decisions and taking action. And I think that is quite a refreshing thing for, in comparison to working for, say, a client who's building a hospital, where things tend to move much more slowly and deliberately. In the retail arena, speed and reaction are important as well as cost. And we used to have a lot of philosophical discussions around energy and sustainability, which took up some time at the early stages of projects quite often. But then, the reality moment came when usually the project manager would say, okay, well, what's good then? What does good look like? And I still use that. I often ask myself the same question, because it's very easy to get carried away with the esoterics of low energy design and the philosophy of sustainability. But at some point, you've got to start making decisions and getting the job done.
So, Mike, you talk about quite large projects, and I know you do a lot of work on your own now. As an independent, same as myself, we're both independent energy consultants. But you've worked in big teams. So, tell me about how you were passing your knowledge on to those teams. Did you have to pass knowledge down, or was your teams already built with the knowledge?
I think team working is always a two-way street. You know, sometimes working with engineers, the trick is to get them to understand what you really want and to just get it done, because there's a deadline and a driver of some sort. But equally, you can't just impose your will upon others. You've got to work collaboratively. And what I always found from that is that if you take a little bit of time to understand that other person's perspective and what their key issues are, you both learn something and are able to actually deliver a better service for the client. So I often, in that situation, I used to look upon myself as a bit of a filter, really, because I was acting as the go-between between my team I've had teams, not often, because you don't often get all the disciplines together on one project. But I remember, one of my larger jobs, thought this is actually really complicated. And when I sat down and listed out, I was representing 31 different specialist disciplines within our business.
Right.
And I was trying to communicate, and that ranged everything from environmental issues, sustainability, transport, civil engineering, structural engineering, rail engineers, traffic engineers, as well as the building side of mechanical and electrical, vertical transportation, lifts, fire. When you start to drill down, there's actually quite a lot of specialisms within building a building. And that's without looking at architecture and all the specialisms within that arena as well. So it can be very complicated. And that I actually enjoyed that kind of team working and being that go-between between the client and the design team and vice versa. And taking all that information and condensing it down and creating a concise report for the client. They don't want to sit and listen to hours of explanation about what you've been doing and what the issues are. They really do want an executive summary and get their questions answered. So I found that quite a useful thing in what I'm doing now, because energy and sustainability are actually, when you start to drill down into things, they're quite complex issues. And even something simple like a window, quite often as an energy assessor, you'll say, well, actually, if a building has single glazing, your recommendation will be to fit usually double or triple glazing. The performance of a particular unit can be dramatically different. A good window can give you a significant energy saving, but a really good window can give you savings that are probably 2 or 3 times better than that, what appears on the surface to be a good window. And it's bringing that kind of knowledge to bear with clients, particularly when you're looking at carbon reduction, because the whole issue of embedded energy, life cycle savings and that type of thing, when you start to look at things in detail, you could say properly, I guess, when you look at things in detail, everything's much more complex than you first imagined. And that part of design development and creating buildings that are both low carbon in construction and operation is a very interesting aspect of the current market, and it's developing.
Mike, when we first met, I'm trying to rack my brains. I think it was 2014, in that sort of period, when we're starting out on the curve for ESOS. And I know you was mentoring someone at the time, and mentoring at the moment is very close to my heart. I feel we need to be doing more mentoring. And even today, I had a conversation with one of our colleagues today, and we were saying about how much mentoring needs to be done because of the academic side of the business that's coming forward now, the new energy expert as we know it. It's very book-based and got good understanding of what needs to be done. But that all changes when you start walking around those buildings. And I know you was doing some mentoring. So tell me, what's your thoughts on mentoring going forward?
Yes, I think, mentoring has been and always will be important. I think you can kind of wrap it up with on the job experience, really, because I think it's one of those things that guys with grey hair like you and me, we've a lot of what we've learned on the job, both from doing things successfully, but also the mistakes that we made. I think sometimes when you're trying to forge new paths on things, that there are lessons to be learned from the past, things that do work and things that don't work. But clearly that, there is going to be a resources problem in the energy and sustainability arena. A lot of the people that have been trained over the last 30 or 40 years, and some of them even longer. In fact, I was reading an interesting thing the other day of a guy in Sweden. He's worked for the same company for 50 years and he's still doing it. And he's active and enjoying it. And he, part of his role is to mentor some of the younger engineers and technicians and give them the benefit of his experience and knowledge. And I think, that with that you can fast track things, and we are going to have to fast track things because we've left it quite late to take the action that's necessary on buildings and other parts of our society which need to become zero carbon in the next, less than 30 years.
Yeah.
And that sounds a long time. But as an example, I know we've just wasted 10 years, because in the last 10 years in the UK and around the world, since the Paris agreements and things like that, we've actually, in reality, done very little. The governments like to talk about how much they decarbonise things and how much, energy use has reduced while GDP has increased, etc. But in reality, I know that, when it comes to turning many of today's businesses into zero carbon operations, and some of those are going to have to be carbon positive to offset the fact that some businesses cannot be zero carbon. And we've got to be taking some of the carbon out of the atmosphere that we've emitted in the last 200 years. It's going to be a major challenge, and most of the solutions that are required, the ones that are really going to be effective in terms of soaking up the carbon that needs to be done, they're not plug and play. And turning an existing building into a much more efficient building is going to require techniques and technology, which some of it hasn't been developed yet, or it hasn't been applied to existing buildings. There's lots of talk about new buildings, and lots of new buildings get all the market exposure. But the reality is that 80% or more of the buildings that will be around when we have to be at net zero are existing, and they are very difficult it's very difficult to make them low carbon without creating damage either to the structure or anything else. And by that I mean the problems of interstitial condensation and general moisture control. When you're trying to create a low energy building within an existing structure, there are lots of problems that almost literally come crawling out the woodwork.
So you've talked about technology, but that needs forget about the amount of money that needs to be invested in that, but the amount of expertise to drive that. If we was to say we needed to start doing that today, we haven't got the experts around us to go and deliver that.
No, I think delivery is the problem. I think a lot of the expertise is there. I think that the important thing is we understand the problems and what the issues are. I think the interesting thing for younger people today are the opportunities that exist, and they're massive, because in a way, you and I are the Neanderthals of low carbon operation, because a lot of the skills and knowledge hasn't been developed. A lot of the details of the techniques have not been developed, so that there is a tremendously long journey ahead of us in doing this, and maintaining a low carbon society is going to take a lot of resources in terms of pure numbers of people, and it's going to take a lot of expertise. And whilst I think you and we do have a lot of knowledge, I think the thing that we shouldn't overlook either is that there are many things yet to be done and many specialisms. You know, when I talked earlier about being, you know, having 30 experts on a job, that's the future. It's not about having one person who can make all the decisions and come up with all the solutions. Collaboration, teamwork is going to be very important in getting the right solutions with the right details. And that's all the way down the supply chain, because at the end of the day, it's not just about being able to design a building and say it needs to meet these performance requirements in order to be zero carbon. The trick then is to have contractors who can deliver the construction and undertake that work to the right standards, because detail, again, is very important in low energy structures. You know, the passive house type standards are going to need to be applied to many, many more buildings than they are today. And then there's the question of the supply chain. And as I've mentioned earlier with the windows, it's not simply a case of saying, well, give me a double glazed or a triple glazed window. It's, well, what are the performance requirements of that window, both in terms of energy efficiency, but, you know, windows can contribute to energy saving by controlling heat loss, but they can also contribute to energy saving by allowing solar gain at the right times of the day and year, so that the net energy demand of a building is lower than it otherwise would be, which is all part of the passive house approach. But bringing all that to work in a building, which then also meets the operational needs of a customer, is complicated.
Yeah.
And it's going to require experts who have solutions. And, you know, as is everything in today's world, everything needs to happen faster. So, you know, we don't want people fumbling around looking for solutions. It will be about going to experts and saying, right, this is what we've got in terms of X. We need this element of the building optimized to suit the client needs and the cost targets, and saying, what's your recommendation to that expert? And then having the confidence to take that advice and apply it. And over time, with multiple projects delivered, that there will be mistakes made, but over time, you know, the teams will be refined, their experience will be refined, and the solutions will be more and more confident. But I think, you know, in terms of mentoring, yes, we do have a lot to pass on, but I think also it's perhaps opening the eyes of the current younger generation who are coming through university and technical colleges, and getting them to realise that there are massive opportunities in this arena, not just from the point of view of design, but construction, operation and maintenance. And there's the opportunity there for a wide range of skills and attributes as individuals and people, because, you know, not everybody's going to be the professor of daylighting and solar gain.
Yeah.
Not everybody's going to be the professor of window design or heat pump design. We're going to need people who are good at doing things on construction sites or in construction facilities such as off-site manufacturing. And then we're going to need people who are good at operating and maintaining those systems, whether they're operating a software platform to optimize building performance,
yep,
or whether they're the right technician to bring into service and fault find on a heat pump system or a humidification system or an air handling unit or a lighting control system. And there's going to be a lot of integration between those systems, because when you've got a very efficient, energy efficient structure, the internal gains and energy demands become even more important, because things can get too hot or too cold quite quickly, and controlling that in the right way, again, it becomes a complex and relatively sophisticated service. So it's using all that intelligence that we have in the wider market and bringing it to bear to make a specific facility as energy efficient and low carbon as possible.
So you mentioned, you mentioned as we're leading into that about the dare I say they are youngsters compared to us, the young students, the new generation, the next generation of the energy expert or the experts in our industry. Now, yes. I categorize them as well into, so I'm part of some energy groups, one of them being the Clean Energy Revolution group, where we all join and chat on a regular basis globally. And I've managed within my head and the groups there. So you've got the environmentalists, the people that are wanting to, not the plant trees, but the environmentalist side of it, waste and plastics, etc. And then you've got the demand side, which is, I put myself in the demand element of it. So I'm not a new build person. I'm a retrofit side where and maintaining, and that's my category. But I always put that as the demand side of the industry. And then you've got the supply side. So I've categorized them into three areas of opportunity, which I think is a massive opportunity going forward in each of those sectors. And what you've been picking up there is both supply and demand. There's a bit of a crossover because we have got renewable energies coming, which is going to add to the opportunities. So the government, I don't know if you see the government announcement yesterday about the 10-point plan they're producing. And one of them is heavily focusing on offshore wind, which is going to be providing significant amounts of employment for new, the next generation, basically. And we're seeing that more and more. Because obviously EV is going to be providing more employment. And I can see the whole sector and sectors of these three sectors, there's going to be loads of new employment opportunities coming through.
There will be. And I think, with things like onshore and offshore wind, which in the efficiency arena, cost effectiveness per kilowatt hour of generating capacity, it's now a very cost effective medium. But that sector alone is also got to start to address the embedded energy within it, because we've got to consider the embedded energy as well as the operational energy, and also what happens to these facilities at end of life. So even the factory that the components, or the factories that the components are being made in, have got to look to their energy efficiency and understand their carbon footprint. Because, as time goes on, we are going to need to understand the whole life cycle impact of bits of equipment and the facilities that those equipment are built in, as well as the facilities that those bits of equipment are going to be supplying energy with. And this is why I say it becomes a much more complex equation. And as a designer, if you're or as an energy carbon consultant, if you're giving a client advice on what is the right decision to make, the data around all of that also has to be to the same common base. So it's a I think it's a very interesting market for the future, and there's no question in my mind. We've got roughly 30 years to get to the what is the stated ultimate goal of zero carbon operation, and the next 30 years alone are going to be very interesting, but the years beyond that will be equally interesting because all the lessons that are going to be learned over the next 30 years will need to be applied and refined even further. This is not a market that's going to go away. It's a job for life and beyond.
Well, I'm going to be 86 in 30 years' time.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, am I still going to be in the industry? Am I still going to be doing the Energy Speaks Back episode 2000 and whatever? So, yeah, I'd like, if I look back at my, I say, and I know I'm hesitating around this, I've been saying probably for the last 10 years, next 2 years, I'm going to retire, next 2 years. And every time that's in my head, the industry explodes into a different dimension and different changes. We had ESOS. We had CRC before then, which I thought was really exciting. Then we had ESOS. And now we've got some stuff coming forward now from Esther regarding ENCOM, which I'm quite excited about, and really getting involved in the energy consciousness of organizations, which really excites me because I really love best practice and helping organizations save energy through, simply turning lights off and changing the way they operate rather than installing loads of technology. That's where a lot of my expertise comes from. But do I see myself still working in 30 years' time? Probably yes, believe it or not. If I am still able to, I would love to be working. I'm so passionate about this industry.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It is so interesting, and I'm in a similar situation, really. I could think about retiring, but certainly for me, it's not something that I'm particularly interested in doing per se. Except I think, working fewer hours and having a better quality of life is also part of the more modern approach to work. And that applies, I think, to younger people as well. People have more of an attitude of working to live rather than living to work. Whereas I think our generation or generations that we're in, we've been through a period, particularly in the late 70s and 80s, when, and even since then, when the attitude has very been, certainly of clients, that we're here to work and that our personal lives and other things are secondary. And I think going forward, a healthier work-life balance is part of future economies. But I think the other side of it, which is, I think, we've been through quite a turbulent 10 years or so, particularly with, recent US elections. And, I'm quite hopeful, and I'm certainly convinced of the need that things will actually become much more global, not necessarily in terms of manufacturing and things like that, because I think localism has and will continue to return to lots of markets. I think the COVID experience has and is deterring businesses from centralizing things too much in one location. I think there's a recognition that diversity has lots of benefits. But I think also global cooperation is necessary if we are going to make this planet safe for the future. And if we're all going to live lives that reflect we are only on one planet, because that's the thing. The Western world has been using 2 or 3 times its fair share. And we've got to rebalance things and work together, because there's no doubt nature's resources are finite, but they also tend to be located in certain parts of the world.
Yeah.
And we have in the UK, we've got a blessing from our long coastline that we've got plenty of potentially wind and solar energy on top of some of the hydro type energies which we also have. Other countries like the Nordic regions have got lots of hydro and are currently using lots of hydro and have quite a low carbon impact because of it.
Mm.
And then we've got the developing world, which tends to probably have wind and tidal to some degree, but it's in the main, it's got a very high amount of solar potential.
Yeah, and we are seeing that come through now, aren't we?
We are, and I think they're looking both locally in the Middle East at putting in solar energy farms and things like that to provide both electricity but also air conditioning sources. And ultimately, I think there will be the potential for energy to be exported from those regions to the northern and southern hemispheres. Yeah. And to do that, you need global energy networks. And I think that type of collaboration is both necessary and I think it will be economically attractive. Because if we're buying energy from, say, North Africa here in Europe, well, that's a way for some of the wealth of Northern Europe to be transferred to North Africa.
Yeah.
And if North Africa is doing well, you'll probably find that will have an uplifting effect on the rest of Africa as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, Mike, look, I'm conscious of your time tonight. Been really great catching up with you. Just before we sort of wind down for the evening and such, can you give any message to our listeners regarding the students or the new people coming into our industry? Is there anything that you would like to leave them with tonight as a takeaway?
I think the thing to bear in mind if you're starting out in this industry or you're thinking of starting out in this industry is that it has massive potential. What we see today isn't the industry that will be here in 5, 10, 20 or 30 years' time. It will continue to evolve and develop. But the opportunities are there for people of all skills and all interests. So, whether you're a software developer or you've got an interest in being in manufacturing or installation works or in design, the opportunities are there and they will develop. And I think certainly in my career, if you'd said to me when I was 20-year-old, where are you going to be in 20 years' time, Mike? I probably didn't have too much of an idea, but I probably had an idea of what I thought it would be. But it actually turned out to be completely different.
I was going to answer that for you. I bet it was different.
Yeah, and that's the thing, that actually if you say, well, what is the opportunity for me long term? I think the short answer and the honest answer is, well, we don't know. Yeah. But I think there is one thing about the energy industry is what we know is it's going to be very important in the future and even more important than it is today, because people will wake up and realise, people who are not interested in energy or carbon at the moment, they'll realise that it is probably the industry of the future.
Totally great. And I actually wrote about this recently, about my origins of where I've come from. And my dad, bless him, he died recently. He said to me that you need to get into energy, son. That's going to be the industry of the future. Well, I'm talking 1980 when he said that to me, and I think it has been all the way through my career. I have seen the changes. It's always been constantly changing all the way through. And as I say, I think about retiring or whatever, but then something else pops up, and it gets more and more exciting, and my passion for this gets more and more exciting, and I'm really loving it. This last sort of 12 months of the industry has been very exciting, I think, because the world has shrunk. The world has shrunk. Technology's improved. We can have these Zoom calls on a regular basis. Today I've had calls with Dubai. In fact, there's 3 people on the call: Dubai, UK, and Pakistan. This morning I was talking to Indonesia. This afternoon I was in America, all in a day's work, and all talking about energy. And one of the things I always say is we all have different languages, but we all speak the same language of kilowatt hours. And that really excites me currently.
Yeah.
Mike, it's been a real honor and a privilege to have you on tonight. We talk on a regular basis, I'm sure, and I'm sure we'll continue our conversations and our good work we're doing. But thank you very much for coming. Please be safe, you and your family, and we'll speak to you soon.
Well, yeah, the same to you, Paul. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And I hope the chat delivers what you hope it will, and I hope it's been helpful to the listeners as well.
I'm sure it will. Thanks, Mike. You take care,
You too.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining me today on this podcast, and thank you for my special guest. Please go and check out our website on www.b2benergy.co.uk, where you can see many more insights to how you can manage that 3rd largest expense. Thank you. That just leaves me for one more thing to say. Be safe.